Well, this morning our task is going to be to do a tune-up on this 04 Mazda 6, and it's a V6. And being a V6, the front coil packs are easy to remove off the spark plugs, but the rear ones, the plenum, sits on top. As you can see, there's one of them, and there's the plenum, and it sits on top. And the only way that you can get that is to remove this upper plenum. So this will be our fun job for this morning. First step is to remove this big plastic cover that makes it all look real clean and spiffy. It looks like there's 3, 1, 2, and 3. Looks like a 10mm. I'd use a deep well on a 1/4 inch drive. Okay, we've got the big old cover off, and you can see now as far as taking the plenum loose, I mean, you got, I think, 6 bolts. There's some down inside there. But I mean, the plenum comes off easy enough. However, you've got all this stuff to the throttle body that'll have to be, let go. Mostly the hoses and the wires. And of course, you got to be very careful with them and stuff. You don't want to break them. That way you can peel this thing back without having too much to put back together. So you want to be selective on what we pull apart here. Okay, I have taken off this one. I just squeezed the little clamp, slid it back, hose popped off. Same with this one right here. And this one right here was just it has no clamp, it just pulled off. These connectors are pains in the butt. Let's see. They are and they're not. They're pretty easy. If you'll see this back here, you squeeze it. And what that does, see how it lifts that when you squeeze it? Now some of them, which have been removed on some of these, or they fell out. See, here's one right here. See that connector? It's got a little red block in it, a little stop, to keep it from being squeezed to release. So, let's put the light on it, or keep it on there. You can just take it, slide it up, squeeze, and pull. Pretty much that simple. What I'm going for here is to disconnect the stuff. I'm going to leave part of this throttle body assembly together and disconnect it from the hose, either from here or from here. That way I don't have to pull tons of stuff loose. Okay, what I've done here, this is part of the EGR valve system. There was 3 8mm bolts that held this thing on. The reason being is you've got a tube right there, and you can possibly unscrew it with a crow's foot. Then you got the whole fun of trying to realign it. So I think it's easier just to disconnect it right here. See if I can keep the light on it, but it just springs loose, so we'll just pull it out of the way. So now we'll go back to the throttle body assembly and see about what we can peel back from it. Okay, I've loosened the clamp right here for this boot, and it just pulled right off. And that's a 10mm. You don't have to unscrew it all the way, just enough where the clamp is loose. And like I said, just slightly pull. Sometimes it'll be stuck, so you have to kind of wiggle it. But so the throttle body's loose. I think there's another hose hidden down here somewhere, and I'll find it here in a bit. This, if I can get both together, this just has a little bitty barb that just sticks in that hole right there. It's not anything, you might have to put a little screwdriver or something, but it just pops loose. Okay. So now the next thing what I would do here is just go ahead and start unscrewing the bolts to the plenum. And don't try to take it off, just wiggle it and start seeing what else might be connected. Because like I said, it's kind of blind, but I'm almost positive there's another hose buried somewhere down here. I'm not sure just yet where, but it seems like there was one that I was like, oh, surprise, but we'll see. I think I forgot to mention to disconnect these two hoses right here. This one slides off and this other one has a clamp. And I disconnected that connector right there. I have put a screwdriver and just pulled these barbs out. It holds these wirings and release it from the. It doesn't take a lot. It just wiggle a screwdriver in between it and the plenum, and it'll pop off. You don't have to do anything really hard. I've taken the 6, or actually I take it back. I was wrong. It's 8 bolts that holds this plenum down, and it's wiggling, but it's still something's holding it. So if we're going to look and see what all's holding it, I'm going to probably go ahead and remove this hose out of the way. I'm trying to do my best not to remove the battery or anything so I can get a clear view, but I'm going to remove this duct to the air cleaner box, and then we'll see what else is holding it on. Okay, it was just a little stuck, but it come free, and I had to kind of pick it up on that end, on the passenger side, and kind of get it a cock and let that EGR tube kind of just slide out of the hole. And I was right about the surprise. There are two hoses right here that connect. One connects the throttle body and one connects to the actual manifold for vacuum pickup. But they are flexible enough you should be able just to set the manifold off the socket. So now you can see we can get to the coil packs and spark plugs in the back. And then the gaskets are just O-rings. There you go. I get the lighting there. That's correct. They're O-rings, and they come in a little pack. And just pull those out and replace them with new ones. But on to the coil pack changing. Okay, the next step I've done is I've disconnected all the coil pack wires. Better to do it before you unscrew the coil packs. So when they're a little bit, when they're firm bolted in there, it's easier to squeeze those tabs on those clips and pull them off. Usually it's probably easier to do a two-hand so you don't jerk it, because being 04 and all the miles, the wires are harder and brittle, so you have to be really careful not to bend the wires excessively so you don't crack them, crack the insulation off of them. So now we'll go ahead and remove the coil packs, 6 of them, and the little bolt that holds the coil pack down is an 8mm. Okay, coil packs are out of the way, front and back. Now it's time to remove the spark plugs. And as I've stated in many videos in the past, anytime you do hemispherical engines like this and the spark plugs are way down in the hole, use an air hose and blow debris out of these holes, because you don't want dirt or whatever to fall down inside the engine. And quick tune-up could turn into a complete disaster. So be sure to air these holes out a little bit. You don't have to blast them real hard, but just kind of blow them out a little bit, and then remove the spark plugs. And as always, when we go to put the spark plugs back in, you want to use some anti-seize, because strip plug or a stuck plug in one of these would be like remove the engine, pull the head, something. You're talking about a massive amount of work. So always good to use a $2 or $3 tube of anti-seize on the threads, and $1,000 in repairing or replacing the heads. Okay, I've put the spark plugs in. They gap at 44 thousandths, or at least the NGKs that I bought. Actually, this engine had the Motorcraft plugs in it, which Mazda engines are used in Ford. Motorcraft is normally Ford. I don't know why somebody would do that, but Mazda comes from factory with NGKs, so I put those back in a higher mileage one too. Just a tip, when you go to put these plugs in, use a socket that's got a rubber boot so that it'll hold it. Just turn it. Tighten your spark plug in by hand. Make sure you at least get halfway down before you put a ratchet on it, because you don't want to cross thread these. You want to ensure that they're actually on there. And the thread sealant actually helps it screw into the threads better. So just a tip. And then when you go to actually tighten it, do a light to medium, more to the light side of a snug on the tightening, because you don't want to over tighten these things. You don't want to strip the head out, but you don't want them coming loose either. So when it gets to the point where it stops, then put a snug on it. Okay, I'm fixing to put these on, but recommendation, right here on the tip, in the hole, up in the hole, and kind of a film over it, put you some dielectric grease on it. That way it gets on the spark plug with the porcelain, and if you got to remove these, it doesn't stick. And then always, just for precautionary, just spray lubricant on the rubber boot. That way, if it does rub, especially where it seals, that way it kind of helps it go in and kind of keeps it from seizing up on the head if you ever got to pull it back out. Okay, I've got all the coil packs in now. I've not put the bolts in the front ones here. But a tip, leave it loose. Leave the bolt out in order to plug your connector up. That way you can move it around and not have to stretch the wires to get it on there. That helps out a whole lot. I know I told you to disconnect it with the ridge of it. That helps get the connector, but you don't have to pull them all the way off. You can always pull the bolts out. Depends on how brittle the wires are or how stiff they feel. So just kind of play by ear, but always remember you can loosen the coil packs to wiggle the wires off once you get the initial connector broke. Because sometimes those connectors practically fuse to those coil packs just from the dirt, dust, heat, and stuff. So just a tip. I'm now pulling out the old rubber gaskets are sealed. I'm just using a pair of small needle nose, getting hold of it here, and just pulling it out. That's it. Then we'll push the new ones back up in the slots. Okay, before setting the intake back in place, I would recommend, spraying carburetor cleaner or brake cleaner, or just, if you got some enamel reducer or lacquer thinner you can put on a rag. Don't try to spray down in the intake manifold, because then you don't want to start the car up with a carburetor cleaner in it or anything flammable, just for the fact that it could mess up the emissions. But just, I'd recommend spraying it on the rag and then wiping down. This one's not too dirty, but it's got a little bit of oil on it, and those seals don't have to have oil film on it, and there's just a little bit of dirt there. So I'm going to wipe it down, spray on a rag, wipe it down, and then the intake will be ready to swing back into place. Or plenum rather, because that's the intake manifold. And always keep note, you don't want to pull the intake manifold, you want to pull the plenum. So if you're asking for a gasket set, it's the plenum set, not the intake manifold set. Okay, I did as I said. I had this side up a little bit, and this right here, I just let it, I just kind of basically stuck this around that EGR tube, and it slid right on. Now, it fell right into place, but number one rule, I have not tightened any bolts down. What you're going to want to do before you start tightening bolts is ensure that all the wires, because this wire here, try to get in between the plenum and the engine, so it tries to pinch. So I didn't push down. But you want to look around, make sure that there's no wires or anything that's in between the plenum and the intake manifold. Just want to be real careful, and use a handheld ratchet or a bar or something to tighten those down. Try to screw them in by hand first, all the plenum bolts, all the eight of them, and they torque it. They call 6 to 9 foot-pounds. 7.5, 8 is plenty good enough. And I will post the specs for all this and the torque pattern that it takes to torque the plenum down with, and then on the site. So I'll leave that link for you. And then we'll start connecting everything back up that I did, and we'll start it and see if it explodes. But let's hope not. Okay, it started right up. Revs up good, smooth. I purposely left these undone. I'm going to push them in now. I did that just in case I had to take it back apart. Anytime you do a snap tip or whatever, it's better to leave it loose until you know it's running. That way you don't have to unsnap it again. It's kind of a rule of thumb. It seems to be running good. Everything seems to be fine. Air conditioning seems to cycle.